How to Eat Fried Worms by Thomas Rockwell, Chapter 13. Nothing to Worry About. That night, Alan asked his father to show him $50. After that, he couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in his rumpled bed. Suppose he lost? He could just see himself asking his father for $50, begging for it, on his knees, tears streaming down his cheeks, and then, at Thanksgiving dinner, cringing, while all his aunts and uncles and cousins roared over his father's story of Alan's bet. He slid out of bed and snuck down the carpeted hall to his parents' bedroom. "You got to wake him, Mrs. O'Hara. You got to," he whispered on the phone. "It's an emergency. I got to speak to him, please. I got a hoarse throat, Mrs. O'Hara. That's why I'm whispering, please." Pause. "Gee, thanks, Mrs. O'Hara. No, I won't ever call this late again. It's. He waited, gnawing on his thumbnail. A board creaked on the stairs. He stiffened. Silence. "What do you want?" Joe said suddenly over the telephone. "Geez, I was sleeping. You woke me up." "Just suppose I lose. My father will never let me take out the money out of my savings account." "I know he won't. You think I'll lose, Joe, huh? Joe, tell me. Give it to me straight, Joe. I gotta know. I can't sleep." Joe sighed. "Look, I told you this afternoon. You got nothing to worry about. He's cracking. Sure, he ate that one today. Sure, he might." Chapter 14. The pain and the blood and the gore. 4 blocks away, Billy suddenly found himself in a brightly lit butcher shop, jostling by a crowd of enormous, pigeon-breasted middle-aged women, shouting to make themselves heard over the din of their chatter and the roars of the butcher ordering about the weasel-faced boys who were lugging haunches and tubs of meat in and out of the refrigerator room in the rear. Then a butcher saw Billy jumping among the women and asked for his order, and Billy gave it. And suddenly he was shoved up close to the butcher block, and the butcher slapped down 10 black worms as big as snakes, and Billy tried to say they were too big. He'd choke on them, but the butcher couldn't hear him over the thumps of his cleaver and the din of the women and the hoarse shouts of the other butchers, and before Billy knew what was happening, he was seated at a table in Longchamp's restaurant in Times Square in New York City with a large napkin tied under his chin, and a waiter was uncovering a platter on which lay one of the huge black worms, coiled snakily, a red rose wobbling in the center of its coils. "How can I ever finish this?" said Billy, and cut into a mammoth coil. Steaming pink juice flooded out. Billy ate and ate and ate, and then looked, and he must have eaten more than that. And then he looked again, and there was no hole at all. He had eaten and eaten and eaten nothing at all. And then he felt something cold on his ankles and looked under the tablecloth, and there were 2 more of the huge worms wound around his ankles. And then he felt something weighing down his arms, and he looked, and there was another worm wound around his arm, glaring hungrily at him with its bloodshot eyes. And from everywhere in the vast room, winding between the tables, waiters approached, carrying huge silver platters. Billy opened his eyes. For the first moment, in the moonlight flooding his bedroom, his 2 bare feet sticking up out of the bottom of the covers looked like 2 huge white worm heads. Then he realized that he had been dreaming and sank back into his pillow, the nightmare melting away. There were no huge worms as big as pythons. He was home in bed. His parents were asleep in the next room. His stomach rumbled. But suppose Joe hadn't been lying. The hair on his back, stood on the back of his neck. Or suppose Joe had made it up, but had been right anyway, without knowing it. A shutter banged. Billy glanced out the window and saw the moon riding among the tossing leaves. His stomach rumbled and gurgled. He groaned. Suppose he was dying. He'd heard of people waking in the middle of the night with pains in their stomach, and then, as the windows turned gray in the dawn, they died. Toadstools, sour lobsters, tainted pork. That was a pain. He clutched his stomach and groaned, half full, half staggered out of bed and hobbled toward the door, bent doubled. Maybe there was an antidote. He whimpered. It didn't hurt a lot, but nothing ever did, to begin with, did it? Chapter 15. 3:15 a.m. His mother reached out and switched on the light. "What kind of pain, Billy?" He stood beside the bed, clutching his stomach. "And my stomach. Oh, there it goes again, I think." "Did you eat something before bed?" She was pulling on her bathrobe. John! She shook her husband's shoulders. He mumbled sleepily. "Did you eat candy or something before bed, Billy?" "Worms," Billy groaned. "Worms? John! Billy, what kind of worms?" Regular worms? Night crawlers? She felt his forehead, lifted his chin to look in his face. You don't have a temperature. How many worms did you eat? 5. 2 boiled and 3 fried, with ketchup, mustard, horseradish, salt, pepper, butter to make them taste better. Fried? Ketchup? Taste better? John, wake up! I had this bet with Alan. Oh, he groaned again. Take your hands away. Where does it hurt now? Show me. It doesn't really hurt so much now. It's just rumbling and gurgling something awful. Then why are you groaning? Asked his father, sitting up. Because I'm afraid I'm going to start hurting. Do you think I'm going to die, Daddy? Worms, his father said. Ordinary worms? Earthworms? Billy nodded. How many did you eat this evening? One this afternoon. I've eaten one every day for the last 5 days, but they weren't little ones, they were night crawlers. Huge ones, as big as snakes almost. His father lay back down, pulling the covers up over around his shoulders. Don't worry. Eating one night crawler a day for 6 weeks won't hurt you. Go back to bed. It's probably all the ketchup and mustard that's upsetting your stomach. Drink a glass of warm water. John, are you sure? Asked Billy's mother. It doesn't seem to me the worms could be a very healthy thing to eat, John. His mother snuggled deeper under the covers. I didn't say eating worms would turn him into an all-American fullback. I just said they wouldn't hurt him. Now let's go back to sleep. Billy's mother glanced at Billy, shivering beside the bed in bare feet and pajamas, and then shook her husband again. John, wake up. I think you should call Mr. McGrath. Dr. McGrath. You don't really know whether or not eating worms is harmful. I know you don't. Billy's father groaned and sat up. Now look, I am not going to call Dr. McGrath at 3:30 in the morning to ask if it's all right for my son to eat worms. That's flat. Secondly, I do know that Billy's not going to die before morning. If worms were poisonous, which they're not, he would have been laid out before this. Billy, you've been eating worms for 5 days? Billy nodded. All right. And thirdly, I ate a live crawfish when I was in college and have suffered no discernible ill effects. And fourthly, I am going to sleep. Billy's mother slipped her feet into her slippers, stood up and buttoned her bathrobe, and then leaned over the bed and shook her husband's shoulder. John, I won't be able to sleep until you call. John, what about tapeworms or a fungus? John, wake up. Billy, you should go back to bed. Your father will call Dr. McGrath. John? Billy lay in bed listening to his mother and father arguing in their bedroom. He could only make out a word or here or there, usually when his father started to shout, only to be shushed immediately by his mother. Billy got sleepier and sleepier. His stomach had stopped rumbling and gurgling. It was warm and cozy under his covers after sitting on the cold floor in his bare feet. Then, in the midst of a foggy drowse, he heard someone dialing the phone in the hall outside his parents' bedroom, and then his father said, Poison control, and explained the case. There had been a silence. Billy heard the water running in the bathroom, and his father said, You're sure? They're little ones. These were night crawlers. Pause. And no long-term ill effects? Pause. His father laughed. A bet, I think. And the next thing Billy knew, sunlight was streaming through his windows, and Emily was skipping down the hall past his door singing, Half a pound of two-penny rice, half a pound of tentacle, that's where the money goes. His father shouted down the stairs. Helen, do you know where my green tie with the red stripes is?